Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast live stream. It is day 12 of Israel's war against Hamas terrorists in Gaza. Hard to believe that it was October 7th that Hamas carried out this mini Holocaust, no other way to say it, invading southern Israel, seizing towns and slaughtering, at last count, at least 1,300 mostly Israeli civilians. And we still have a hostage crisis right now, folks, unfolding as well in Gaza, with some 200, including some U.S. citizens, dragged into the bowels of hell in the tunnels beneath Gaza in the clutches of Hamas and Islamic Jihad right now. So, prayer warriors watching right now, we've got a lot to pray for and a lot to pray about, including when will Israel go into Gaza on the ground? That's been the stated goal of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, to crush, his words, crush Hamas decisively once and for all as any sort of threat to the world's one and only Jewish state. He has promised an assault by, quote, air, sea, and land. Is that complicated by President Biden's visit today, October 18th, to Israel? We're going to break that down in a minute. But first, we have to start with what has been the big news story to come out of this war over the past 24 hours. Now, in yesterday's live stream, we mentioned this hospital, Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital in Gaza City, that it fell victim to an explosion and at least 500 people inside the hospital were killed. Now, automatically, Hamas ran with this and accused Israel of carrying out an airstrike against this hospital. On yesterday's live stream, I said, absolutely, that is not the case. Number one, that is not how the Israel Defense Forces conducts wars. They would never target a hospital. That's common sense in times where common sense, sadly, is not so common. Number two, I said, folks, look for it. We're going to have video and photographic evidence very shortly of what really happened at this hospital, this horrible incident at this hospital in Gaza City. Well, lo and behold, we have it. We've got the video, we've got the pictures, and then some. We also have audio released by the Israel Defense Forces today of Hamas terrorists conversing among each other and explaining what really happened. It was a misfire, folks, not by Israel. A misfire by Hamas's fellow Iran-backed terror group in Gaza, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Don't take my word for it. Let's listen to what these two Hamas terrorists had to say about the bombing of this hospital yesterday. Take a look.
بقول لك أول مرة بنشوف الصاروخ زي هيك والشظايا هذه، فبقول لك تبع الجهاد الصواريخ الجهاد الإسلامي يعني. إيه؟ فهم بقولوا تعاون الجهاد الإسلامي. إنه من عندنا هذا؟ شكله من عندنا مين اللي بيقول هيك؟ بيحكوا إنه الشظايا تبعت الصاروخ إنه الشظايا محلية مش زي شظايا إيش بتقول؟ سبحان الله من عندنا ما لقاش غيرين بجرثبي. عاد هذول تلاقيهم من المقبرة الورا دي بفلت محط فيهم. ايش اصدر؟ بتلاقيهم طالعين من المقبرة اللي ورا المستشفى المعمداني دي اللي هو فسه ونزل عندهم. هو في مقبرة وراه؟ المعمداني ولا عند الساحة بالضبط. هي وين لما تدخل على الساحة؟ أول ما تدخل على الساحة تدخلش على البلد عيدك اليمين في مستشفى المعمداني. عرفتها.
You know, it was the famous American author Mark Twain who said, the truth can travel halfway around the world lies, can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. And folks, that's exactly what happened here with this hospital massacre, a massacre courtesy of an Islamic Jihad misfired rocket. Now, two things here to keep in mind. And by the way, if you're just joining us for the first time here on the Watchman Newscast, make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. As I mentioned at the top, we're coming to you every day live during this war between Israel and Hamas. We want to be your one-stop shop for everything unfolding in the Middle East right now and breaking down and making sense of it all and why it matters to you no matter where you live, because, folks, I believe we are seeing, number one, prophetic events unfolding right now in the Middle East, the world's most chaotic and volatile region. But number two, what happens in the Middle East does not stay in the Middle East. Bear that in mind as I lay out 2 points that we need to bear in mind and keep in mind about the hospital bombing. Number one, this really, I'm sad to say, should come as no surprise if you've been following the war efforts, the terror efforts of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, not only over the past several years, but in this conflict in particular, since the beginning of hostilities initiated by Hamas, a war that Israel did not want, but a war that Israel must and will win. Since that war kicked off with the Hamas slaughter on October 7th, at least 450, according to the Israel Defense Forces, at least 450 Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad rockets have indeed misfired. They never reached their intended targets. Hamas's fellow Palestinians killed by Hamas and Islamic Jihad misfired rockets, at least 450 at last count, which have fallen inside of the Gaza Strip. Some Israelis have described this as a double war crime, where Hamas and Islamic Jihad are intentionally targeting Israeli civilians with those rockets and missiles, and they are killing also Palestinian civilians every time they misfire. But folks, that is the state of play right now. It's a world turned upside down, and the prophet Isaiah talked about this. Times when good is called evil and evil is called good. Bible times. Why do I bring that up? Because of the knee-jerk immediate response and reaction to the explosion in this hospital in Gaza City yesterday. We had not only the New York Times and the usual suspects in the mainstream media jumping all over Israel and accusing Israel of carrying out an airstrike, basically an airstrike misfire, basically a war crime, accusing Israel, and some came out and said it, accused Israel of war crimes. Not only the media propaganda machine on behalf of Hamas, but nations in the Middle East, Arab and Muslim nations from Turkey to Iraq to Lebanon to Yemen and beyond, rising up in massive protest against Israel, accusing Israel of genocide and a war crime and of intentionally bombing this hospital, not only attacking and trying to storm in some cases, this happened in Jordan as well, trying to attack and menace Israeli consulates and embassies in those countries, but also U.S. embassies, in particular in Lebanon. Now, surprise, surprise, or not, Lebanon is home to, drumroll please, Hezbollah, Iran's most lethal and dangerous proxy. And right now we have a bit of a stare down, folks, where the United States has positioned warships and aircraft carriers, 2 carrier groups, as a matter of fact, off the coast of Israel. And also, as we reported on yesterday's newscast, and by the way, if you miss any of our newscasts, our live streams, just check them out here on the homepage under newscast. They are all right there. But yesterday we reported that the U.S. Pentagon is basically telling some 2,000 U.S. troops to be on high alert for potential deployment to the Middle East in what they're calling a non-combat role. Now, I mentioned that yesterday on the live stream. It's a non-combat role, according to the Pentagon. We had a lot of feedback and a lot of comments begging to differ with that. A lot of skeptical viewers leaving comments yesterday. So what do you think of that? Will this remain a non-combat role for U.S. forces, or will U.S. forces get involved here? I said there's a stare down going on, chiefly over Lebanon. And I said that because of, number one, the carrier groups, number two, the potential of U.S. troops coming to the region. But number three, because Hezbollah and Iran are accusing the United States of being directly culpable in the hospital bombing yesterday. They say the great Satan, their words, that's what they refer to the United States as, is arming and supplying and supporting the nation they know as the little Satan, the nation of Israel. On the other hand, Israel is saying that the U.S. presence in the region is serving as a deterrent to Iran and Hezbollah and preventing them from getting involved, opening new fronts, and broadening this all into a wider war. But folks, make no mistake about it, the Lebanon border right now is an absolute tinderbox, a very precarious situation. And we've kind of broken it down here in the newscast over the past few days. If Hezbollah and Iran choose to get involved and open up that northern front, meaning Hezbollah firing rockets, and Syria as well, which is a crucial part of that northern front for Iran's ring of fire that surrounds Israel on all sides, would the U.S. respond by, number one, shooting down some of those Hezbollah rockets out of Lebanon and Syria, and number two, look, there is still a U.S. troop presence in Syria and Iraq, some 900 U.S. troops in Syria, and between 2,000 and 3,000, I believe, in Iraq right now. Would they get involved? And would U.S. airstrikes target those Iranian-backed Shia militias in Iraq and Syria? Folks, in today's Middle East, expect the unexpected. Truly right now, anything is possible, everything is on the table, both good and bad, and if anyone tells you any different, they're not telling you the truth, because no one right now except God above really knows where this is all heading. Now, in the meantime, we mentioned at the top, Joe Biden, and as these protests continue to rage, that Twain quote that I butchered earlier, but is very apt, that, hey, a lie travels halfway across the world while the truth is putting on its shoes. Very apt as these protests, the Arab and Muslim world. And we showed you the Hamas audio. You heard it. You saw the footage of the rocket misfiring. We showed you that as well. But many in the Muslim world right now don't seem to care about the facts, and they're using this as a cudgel to bash Israel. But Joe Biden, as we mentioned at the top, was in Israel today, Wednesday, October 18th. He met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He said this is a show of solidarity with Israel. I've got some thoughts on that after these clips. Here it is, President Biden. You see him there with Prime Minister Netanyahu. He's coming off the plane. But he had some comments not only about the hospital incident, but also about the hostages. Yes, remember the hostages, folks. At least 200, including several Americans, still held in Gaza. Let's take a look.
I was deeply saddened and outraged by the explosion at the hospital in Gaza yesterday. And based on what I've seen, it appears as though it was done by the other team, not you.
Now, interesting, the terminology used there, folks. I don't know, kind of weird. The other team did it. They're playing for the other team. Hamas is not just the other team. They are bloodthirsty, vicious, genocidal terrorists. This isn't an intramural soccer game, the other team. But at least he acknowledged, and thank God, that this was not Israel that conducted the explosion, that was behind the explosion at this hospital in Gaza City. So I have more thoughts on the solidarity showing and what's going on behind the scenes, and my serious concerns that this administration in Washington is putting pressure on Israel, pressure to the point of pressuring Israel perhaps to prematurely agree to a ceasefire before the job is done, the stated goal of crushing Hamas. But up first, we've got more sound from that press conference between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu today in Israel. Let's take a look, talking about the hostages.
Terrorist group Hamas has slaughtered, as has been pointed out, over 1,300 people. And it is not hyperbole to suggest slaughtered. And including 31 Americans as part of that. And they've taken scores of people hostage, including children.
Children, the elderly. By the way, folks, if you're watching right now, tonight, quick programming note. Speaking of the hostages, speaking of the elderly, on our TBN special, Israel Under Fire, again, that airs tonight, Wednesday, October 18th at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Mark your calendars tonight. Don't miss it. I'm hosting a TBN special. I'm here in New York City hosting a TBN special called Israel Under Fire, where I interview the granddaughter of one of the hostages. She is 85 years old. Yafa Adar, you may have seen the footage, dragged into the bowels of Gaza by Hamas on a golf cart. She had such a peace about her. It was amazing to see this 85-year-old Israeli woman who's experienced all of Israel's wars. She's lived through all of Israel's wars since 1948, There she is. You see the footage there in the clutches of Hamas terrorists. Imagine if that was your grandmother. Or if you are a grandmother, imagine if that was you, dragged off in the clutches of bloodthirsty, demonic terrorists. Well, we'll bring you the inside story tonight on Israel Under Fire. Again, that's 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time on TBN. Don't miss it. We interview the granddaughter of Yafa Adar and her plea for her grandmother. And folks, over the past few days on the live stream, we've been praying a Genesis 14 prayer, and we've asked you to join with us. Remember the story of Abram, who became known as Abraham, the patriarch, and how he and a group, the Bible lays out, of 318 well-trained men went to save his nephew Lot, Abraham's nephew, who was held hostage, captive, dragged off by Canaanite pagan kings. Well, Abraham got Lot back and then some. It was a miraculous rescue, and we're praying here. We ask you to join us again that we have similar types of miracles that emerge from Gaza right now, that we hear amazing stories about how God went ahead of the Israel Defense Forces and was able to save these hostages from the clutches of these demonic, no other word to use here, demonic Hamas terrorists, modern-day Nazis, only wearing different uniforms. And yet, we have Hamas support growing around the world. We're going to show you a clip of that in a minute, but before I do, a quick thought on what I mentioned about that show of solidarity by President Biden. Thus far, the Biden administration has mostly said all the right things publicly, strong. We stand with Israel, we always will. And that's all great, because the perception in the Muslim world is very important. If the Muslim world sees daylight, in particular the Iranian regime, between Israel and the U.S., they will look to pounce and capitalize and take advantage. That's been shown time and time again over the years, in particular under the Obama administration, when there seemed to be daylight and disagreement between the U.S. and Israel. My concern is that behind the scenes, that there is pressure being applied to Israel and that there will be an attempt to tie Israel's hands. Could you imagine in the wake of 9/11? This was Israel's 9/11. This was Israel's Pearl Harbor. Could you imagine in the wake of 9/11 any country trying to restrain America's response? Of course not. And America would have said, no way, too bad, we're doing what needs to be done. Well, Israel needs to have the same attitude right now, folks. But my concern is that some momentum is being lost. What do I mean by that? In the wake of the October 7th slaughter, the world, by and large, was behind Israel, and as well they should have been. It was a mini Holocaust, the most brutal, deadliest slaughter of the Jewish people since the Holocaust. So the world, even in some cases, I was surprised by some who were making statements of solidarity with Israel. But now time is marching on. We're on day 12, and it seems that the media and world narrative is starting to shift away from what happened on October 7th, which started all of this, what Hamas did, and shifting more towards Gazan civilians and what happened at the hospital, and trying to draw a moral equivalency between Hamas terrorists and the Israel Defense Forces. Well, the problem with that narrative, there's many problems with it, but you heard it earlier when you heard the Hamas audio. Israel had nothing to do with what happened at that hospital in Gaza City. But nonetheless, as this ground invasion is delayed more and more, and look, folks, I'm not a military strategist. I interview Israeli military strategists, generals, defense officials on a regular basis. They're brilliant, and I've learned a lot from them, quite frankly. So look, a ground invasion is not something you do haphazardly or rush into. I get it. But the more this stretches out, and Biden's visit today obviously delayed a ground invasion even more, does the tide of world opinion continue to turn against Israel? That's my concern. At the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. You might say, are you crazy? Israel needs all the friends and allies it can get. Yes, it does, and that's why we do what we do here in the Watchman. But at the end of the day, Israel's going to do what it needs to do, I believe, number one. Pray for Prime Minister Netanyahu right now and Israel's leaders that they stiffen their spines against this resistance and pressure that is inevitably coming, including from the Biden administration behind the scenes. There's no secret why Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, was in a war cabinet meeting. I don't know if that's unprecedented. It sounds like it is. One of Israel's war cabinet meetings the other day. Interesting. and listening in essentially on Israel's war plans. But I say it doesn't matter because we know how this book ends. I've read it from cover to cover. Israel does prevail. It ain't going to be easy, and that's an understatement. But Israel does prevail. Hamas is eventually crushed. We do know that. And Israel, at the end of the day, needs to put its trust not in men, but in God above, the God of Israel. And that's the bottom line. So we know how this ends. We know it's not going to be pretty, and then some getting there. But it certainly complicates matters when your allies and the world at large does not have your back and is accusing you of being the bad guy in what really, folks, there's no gray areas here. Clearly, this is a battle between good and evil. Again, no gray areas. Israel is defending its very existence against Iran-backed genocidal jihadist terrorists who have pledged to wipe the world's one and only Jewish state off the map. They've made no bones about it. Israel is defending its citizens, responding to a massacre, an invasion of its sovereign territory. Again, really no gray areas here. And yet, on American college campuses and I laid out countries like Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, etc., that's not surprising, sad to say. But many, I think, many of my fellow Americans in particular, have been shocked over the past several days to see what's unfolded on American college campuses. And in cities like New York City, where I'm sitting right now, like Chicago, like Philadelphia, my hometown, and in also places like London and Sydney, Australia. Folks, in Australia of all places, there were chants of "gas the Jews" at one of these protests. And I said it on yesterday's live stream, I'll say it again. Out of the ashes of the Holocaust at the end of World War II, when American GIs uncovered the true magnitude, the true extent, the true severity of the Nazi crimes, when they liberated the death camps and they saw what the Nazis had done, there was global outrage, anguish at the images that people saw. And now today we have even more images. We have social media, obviously, and we have Hamas themselves, the perpetrators of the crime. Whereas the Nazis try to cover up their crimes, Hamas has been gleefully posting videos and images of exactly what they did on their social media accounts. So the world has no excuse. We see what happened, but still we have what you see on your screen right now, these protests, pro-Hamas protests after Hamas carried out a massacre. Again, evil called good, good called evil. And on American college campuses, no excuse. I don't want to hear the age excuse. Well, they're 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. You do dumb stuff when you're that age. Hey, I did too, folks, and I didn't know the Lord at that age. But let me tell you, when I was 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, college-aged, I knew the difference between right and wrong and good and evil. And I stood against massacres of innocent civilians and genocide. Apparently, some on our elite American universities have a different view, needless to say. I think we have a clip in particular of a protest in London, England, if we can take a look at that now real quick, to give you an idea of the kind of rhetoric being bandied about at these protests. Let's take a look, including right here in the West.
1, 2, 3, 4. Occupation no more. 5, 6, 7, 8. Free,
Folks, that's London. That is London, England, which has historically been one of the great pillars of Western civilization. Hey, the gospel went out from London for centuries. That's London, what you're seeing right now. That's London in 2023. And it's not only London. As I mentioned, New York City, Sydney and Melbourne, Australia, Chicago, Philadelphia, Berlin, Germany, of all places, where synagogues, by the way, yesterday were vandalized in Berlin, Germany, of all places. We did have Olaf Scholz, the German chancellor, thankfully, make statements in strong support of Israel, and that's always welcome. But again, I mentioned when the rubber hits the road, when the times get really tough, you know who your friends are, right? Well, you might say, well, Stakelbeck, what are you talking about? Times are already tough right now for Israel. There was a massacre, they're at war. Yes. But folks, it's going to get nastier, and I hate to say it, but I think you'd rather know than not know. If you're watching this live stream right now, you're not the type who wants to bury their head in the sand and who wants me to mince words and scratch your itching ears with pleasant thoughts of it's all going to be, there's going to be a ceasefire tomorrow and no one's going to be killed. And folks, I wish I could bring that message. But if I did, I wouldn't be honest, number one. And number two, you wouldn't watch precisely because I was being dishonest. I don't think the average Watchman viewer wants to hear that. Fasten your seatbelts. Look, it's going to get nastier. In Gaza, no doubt. And I said you can tell who your friends are when the going gets really tough. When Israel does what needs to be done, does what's necessary, and crushes Hamas on the ground. Eventually, I don't like the delay, but I don't know what Israeli, obviously, military leaders and political leaders know, needless to say. I don't like the delay merely because I feel like, again, as I mentioned a minute ago, that world opinion insanely is starting to turn against Israel and trying to draw that moral equivalency between Israel's operation in Gaza and Hamas terror. So the more that is delayed, the more that groundswell against Israel builds. That I don't like, but Israel clearly and Israel's leaders know what they're doing, and then some. Listen, I've been on the borders of Syria, Lebanon with the Israel Defense Forces on live fire drills. They've been training for this for years. So Gaza, and by the way, any civilian deaths in Gaza, including at that hospital in Gaza City, they're on Hamas's hands. The blood is on the hands of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and by extension, on the hands of the Iranian regime. I think that's a good place to close right now. And we've been hammering this home over the past few days. The head of the snake, or as former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has called it, the octopus with its tentacles stretching across the region, is the Iranian regime. And at the end of the day, you can deal with Hamas and decisively crush them. You can decisively crush Hezbollah as well. But until you deal with the Iranian regime, terror will continue in the region, not only in the region, but around the world. So folks, I ask you, and I'd love to get your comments here, because we have a highly educated audience here. We've got thousands with us right now. What do you think? How should and when should the Iranian regime be held responsible for the war that it just provoked and for the war that it is threatening on a daily basis right now to escalate? These are threats being breathed every day by Iran's foreign minister, and we've documented them for you here in the live stream over the past several days. Iran's foreign minister, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei as well, they continue to say around the clock that if Israel continues its airstrikes, and especially if Israel invades Gaza on the ground, we are going to expand this war and open up multiple fronts. Iran and Hezbollah have been saying this on the regular, around the clock, and we're seeing what before some were calling them skirmishes along Israel's border with Lebanon. Folks, this is war footing along that Lebanon border. Make no mistake about it. Hezbollah over the past few days has fired a succession of anti-tank missiles that have killed Israelis. I mean, some would call this, in normal times, perhaps if that war wasn't unfolding, that front, this is looking more and more like a shooting war to the north. Now, Hezbollah obviously has not unleashed that full arsenal, at least 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed at every inch of Israel. That has not, thank God, been unleashed. But folks, it is an absolute tinderbox right now to the north. And that's where I personally am watching most closely, the north. The northern front is much more dangerous than the south, and I'm watching this world reaction. It's interesting, again, to see who Israel's true friends are when things really get nasty. Well, for Israel, for every Israeli watching right now, know that you have true friends here on the Watchman. We continue to lift the nation and the people of Israel up in our prayers every day. Two quick programming notes again before we go. Don't miss Israel Under Fire, my TBN special tonight, Wednesday, October 18th, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Also tomorrow, and I think you're going to like this, Amir Sarfati, our good friend Amir from Behold Israel, founder, president of Behold Israel. Amir has an incredible channel right here on YouTube. Go to Behold Israel and subscribe right now. Amir will be joining us from Israel with on-the-ground perspective and analysis, and in particular, Amir will be sharing prophetic perspective. What does the Bible say about everything that's unfolding right now, and where is this all going? I can't think of a better person to share that than our good friend Amir Sarfati of Behold Israel. He will be joining us on the live stream tomorrow. I believe, by the way, we'll be going a bit earlier tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. My team will correct me afterwards if I am. I believe we're going at 12 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow with the one and only Amir Sarfati. I was just confirmed, 12 p.m. Eastern, right here on our channel, live with Amir Sarfati tomorrow. Do not miss that. Until then, thanks so much for joining us here today on the live stream. Continue to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, for all of Israel. Pray for the hostages, a Genesis 14 miracle every day. We'll continue to pray for that, and Psalm 91 as well. Go back and read through Psalm 91. There's a reason it's known as the soldier's prayer. I'm praying that daily as well over the people of Israel and the IDF soldiers. Until tomorrow, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.